When you think of war, you think of sound, right? Explosions, gunfire, the roar of engines. But what if the deadliest weapon in the world makes no sound at all? What if it's completely invisible? Well, that's the story we're diving into today, the dark history of biological weapons.
That's really the perfect way to describe it. Silent, invisible, and absolutely terrifying. This isn't about one big, loud bang. It's about a quiet, creeping horror that can move through an entire population before anyone even realizes they're under attack.
So what are we really talking about here? At its core, biological warfare is, well, it's weaponizing life itself. It takes the very building blocks of biology, things like bacteria, viruses, toxins, and twists them into tools of death. The concept is as brilliant as it is horrifying. Now, you might be thinking this is all some modern horror, but the idea of using disease as a weapon is actually ancient. So let's start at the beginning and trace how these, let's call them desperate gambits, slowly evolved into calculated acts of sabotage. Just look at the evolution here. During the American Civil War, using smallpox was just a rumor, a pretty desperate, unconfirmed tactic. But then you fast forward about 50 years to World War I, and boom, it's a full-blown state strategy. The German army wasn't even targeting soldiers directly. They were going after the supply lines, the war machine, their horses and mules. And that's the key, right? The goal here wasn't mass casualties, not yet. It was all about mass disruption. By infecting animals with stuff like anthrax, Germany was trying to cripple supply lines, stop transportation in its tracks, and just create chaos way behind the front lines. It was a quieter, sneakier kind of war. But that goal of just disrupting armies, well, that was about to be replaced by something far, far more monstrous. World War II is the moment that biological weapons went from being tools of sabotage to instruments of pure atrocity and mass murder.
And at the dark heart of this chapter is a name that has become synonymous with some of the worst acts imaginable. A name that hid its horrific purpose behind a boring, bureaucratic title. Unit 731.
What happened there under General Shiro Ishii's command? It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. They didn't just test diseases. They intentionally inflicted them on thousands of living people, performing unspeakable experiments like live dissections, just to see exactly how these germs destroyed the human body from the inside out. They even went so far as to airdrop fleas carrying the plague onto Chinese cities, turning entire civilian populations into unwilling lab rats. The estimated death toll from this? Over 200,000 people. But the horror doesn't stop there. In a really chilling end to this story, the United States actually gave many of the scientists responsible for this immunity. Why? In exchange for their research data. Now, while Unit 731 was the absolute worst of the worst, the Allied powers were also exploring this new frontier of warfare. Their work, though, took a different, but still really dangerous, path. Yeah, this research wasn't happening in a vacuum. Over in the UK, they ran experiments with anthrax bombs on a place called Gruinard Island. And it was so bad, the island was left toxic and totally off limits for almost 50 years. And in the US, Fort Detrick became the hub for weaponizing agents like anthrax. The weapons were ready to go, but thankfully, they were never actually used in the war. Okay, so after World War II, the world dives headfirst into the Cold War. Publicly, all the nations were talking about peace and disarmament, but behind the scenes, a new, secret arms race was escalating to some terrifying new heights. And this is where you get this incredible hypocrisy. In 1972, the world signs the Biological Weapons Convention, basically vowing to ban these things forever. But at the very same time, the Soviet Union was secretly building something called Biopreparat, the largest, most sophisticated biological weapons program in human history. And the scale of their work was just breathtaking. They didn't just have anthrax. They successfully weaponized smallpox, a disease the rest of the world was actively trying to eradicate, and even terrifying viruses like Marburg. They were also pushing the boundaries of science, looking into genetically engineered pathogens, what you might call superbugs. For years, this program was one of the most closely guarded secrets on the planet. But in 1979, the truth? Well, it literally leaked out. An accidental release of anthrax spores from a secret facility in a city called Sverdlovsk proved that the Soviets were lying to the entire world. The official Soviet story?
Oh, it was just 66 deaths from some tainted meat. Nothing to see here. The reality, according to Western intelligence? Probably hundreds dead, making it the deadliest anthrax outbreak in recorded history. So let's bring it to the modern era, because the nature of this threat has changed completely. The fear is no longer about a superpower arms race. It's about the terrifying thought of these weapons falling into the hands of smaller, much more unpredictable groups. You can really see how this threat has kind of decentralized over the past few decades. It started with rogue nations like Iraq in the 80s. Then it moved to non-state groups like the Aum Shinrikyo cult in Japan. And then, most chillingly, it came down to individuals, which is what we saw in the United States back in 2001. I mean, Saddam Hussein's Iraq had a massive program. That Japanese doomsday cult Aum Shinrikyo, they tried to deploy anthrax, but thankfully were just really bad at it and failed. But the 2001 attacks in the US brought the threat home. The anthrax didn't come from a foreign enemy. It came from inside a US Army laboratory, a deeply unsettling end to that whole investigation. And this brings us to the big paradox of our time. The weapons themselves are illegal, banned by international treaty. But the knowledge, the science to create them, is more widespread than ever, all thanks to the explosion in biotechnology. Look, we all just lived through a global lesson in biological disruption. Now, COVID-19 wasn't a weapon, of course. It was a naturally occurring virus. But the pandemic showed us, in the starkest way possible, just how unprepared the world is for a fast-moving biological crisis, whether it's natural or man-made. It proved how a single tiny pathogen can literally shut down the entire planet. So, this leaves us with a really profound question, doesn't it? The same biotechnology that can cure diseases and feed the hungry also holds the key to creating some of the most devastating weapons ever imagined. It's a double-edged sword with the highest possible stakes, and it really forces us to ask, which path are we choosing to go down?